He wasn't born a god, but some believed he became one. In the heart of ancient Macedonia, under the shimmering stars of 356 BCE, a boy was born who would one day shake the foundations of the known world. His name, Alexander, would become legend. A name whispered in awe by generals, studied by emperors, and feared by kings. He lived fast, he dreamed big, and in just over a decade, he carved an empire larger than any before him. From the green hills of Greece to the golden sands of Egypt, from the rivers of Persia to the edge of India, his army marched, unstoppable. But Alexander was more than just a conqueror. He was a philosopher, a visionary, a symbol. He wasn't content with power, he wanted immortality, not by living forever, but by doing what no man before him had dared. He was tutored by Aristotle, crowned before his 20s, feared by emperors twice his age, and loved, or hated, by every land he touched. His enemies called him a monster. His men called him a god. And history? History called him great. This is not just the story of a king. This is the journey of a young man who defied fate, who shaped the world with sword and mind, and whose shadow still stretches across centuries. This is the story of Alexander the Great. Before he became a legend, before his name thundered across continents, before the world bent to his will, Alexander was a child, a boy born into a palace, yes, but also into pressure, prophecy, and power. He opened his eyes for the first time in Pella, the capital of ancient Macedonia, a land rough and rugged, yet rising in power. The year was 356 BCE, and the stars were said to shine brighter than ever on the night of his birth. Some claimed the Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the world, burned to the ground the very night he was born. A coincidence? Perhaps. But to the people of the time, it was a sign. A sign that a force had entered the world that would change everything. His father, King Philip II, was no ordinary man. He was a military genius, a brilliant strategist, and an ambitious ruler who transformed Macedonia from a fragmented kingdom into a rising superpower. Philip was not only feared by his enemies, but respected, even envied, by the Greeks of the south. Through a mixture of war, diplomacy, and cunning, he united the fractious Greek city-states under his control, something previously thought impossible. But Philip's achievements weren't only on the battlefield. He built a strong central government, reformed the Macedonian army, and, perhaps most importantly, prepared the kingdom for something far greater. He believed his son would go further than he ever could, and he made sure Alexander had every tool to do so. Alexander's mother, Olympias, was just as important in shaping the boy who would one day become king. A woman of strong will, deep passion, and fierce loyalty, Olympias claimed descent from Achilles, the mythic Greek hero of Troy. She filled her son's imagination with tales of divine lineage, heroic destiny, and cosmic purpose. From her, Alexander inherited his fire, his belief that he was not just human, but something more. From an early age, Alexander was caught between 2 powerful forces, his father's realism and military brilliance, and his mother's mysticism and dreams of greatness. While other boys played with wooden swords, Alexander studied warfare, philosophy, and poetry. He listened carefully to stories of Achilles, Hercules, and the gods of Olympus, not as fiction, but as destiny. He believed he was born to follow in their footsteps, or even to surpass them. At the age of 13, Alexander's life took another turn. His father brought in a tutor, not just any tutor, but the greatest mind in the Greek world, Aristotle. Yes, that Aristotle, the student of Plato, the teacher of logic, science, ethics, and politics. Under Aristotle, Alexander studied astronomy, medicine, literature, and philosophy, but he also learned leadership, debate, persuasion, the tools of kingship. From Homer's epics to biology, From the Iliad to zoology, Aristotle opened Alexander's mind to the vast possibilities of the world. One story tells of young Alexander asking his teacher why there seemed to be an infinite number of worlds, and crying when he realized he might never conquer them all. Even as a teenager, his ambition knew no limits. Yet for all his brilliance, Alexander was not just a scholar. He trained every day in the arts of war, sword fighting, archery, horseback riding, formation tactics. He learned not just how to lead soldiers, but how to fight beside them. He was gifted a wild and untamable horse named Bucephalus. No man could ride it. It reared, bucked, and resisted every rider. But Alexander noticed something others didn't. The horse was afraid of its own shadow. He calmly turned the horse toward the sun so it couldn't see its shadow, and mounted it with ease. He tamed the beast not with strength, but with understanding. His father, watching in amazement, is said to have whispered, "My son, find yourself a kingdom big enough. Macedonia is too small for you." And so the seed was planted. By the time Alexander turned 16, he was already commanding troops in his father's absence. He suppressed revolts, established cities, and proved himself not just as a prince, but as a warrior leader in his own right. But fate moved quickly. At the age of 20, Alexander's life changed forever. King Philip was assassinated, stabbed to death during a celebration. Conspiracy theories flew. Some blamed enemies of the crown. Others whispered that Olympias may have played a role. Whatever the truth, the throne now stood empty, and Alexander took it. Many in the kingdom and beyond doubted him. They saw a boy, not a king, a dreamer, not a ruler. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The first test of Alexander's rule came swiftly, and it came in the form of an uprising. His enemies were many, his allies, few. But Alexander's mind was clear. He was the king, and he would not tolerate rebellion. When his father, King Philip II, had unified Greece under his command, the region was left with little choice but to follow. But not all were satisfied with this new Macedonian dominance. Soon after Alexander's ascension, several Greek city-states, including Thebes, thought they could challenge the young king's authority. They believed they could see him as just another boy, another king who would fall. They were wrong. In the spring of 336 BCE, when Alexander was just 20 years old, he moved swiftly to put down the rebellion. His response was both swift and ruthless. With a force of approximately 30,000 soldiers, he marched to Thebes, the most powerful of the rebelling cities, in a matter of days. Thebes, once the rival of Athens, had relied on its walls, on its position, and on the idea that Macedon was distracted with internal matters. But they underestimated Alexander's brilliance in battle. At the Battle of Thebes, Alexander's forces crushed the city's resistance. The result was devastating. Most of Thebes was destroyed, its population slaughtered or enslaved, and its sacred temples ravaged. It was not just a victory, it was a message to Greece, to Persia, to the world. "I am no boy," Alexander seemed to say with every victorious step. "I am a king, a force of nature." But it wasn't just sheer military might that made Alexander stand out. It was his tactics. He understood the battlefield like few others. He knew that wars were not won on the strength of soldiers alone, but on the strength of strategy, knowledge, and adaptability. In his battles, Alexander would often employ ingenious strategies, like feigning retreat to lure enemies into traps, or positioning his forces to outmaneuver opponents much larger than his own army. His campaign wasn't just about fighting wars, it was about breaking down the old world order and building something new. The Battle of Chaeronea, fought in 338 BCE, was the pivotal moment that cemented Alexander's reputation as not just the king of Macedonia, but as a military genius. At Chaeronea, Alexander, at just 18 years old, led a cavalry charge that broke the Greek alliance's lines, sending the city-states scattering in defeat. It was this battle that made Alexander a legend among his people, even before his father's untimely death. But no sooner had Alexander crushed the Greek resistance than his attention turned eastward, to Persia. The great Persian Empire had long been a looming threat to Greece and the Greek city-states. For years, the idea of crossing into Persia was nothing more than a dream, a distant hope. But Alexander, a man of action, saw opportunity. His army, now hardened by the campaigns in Greece, marched eastward toward Asia Minor, the gateway to the Persian heartland. With the fall of Thebes, Alexander did not just conquer territory, he transformed the very concept of war. His ambitions were not bound by the limits of a single kingdom. Alexander sought empire, not just rule. The Battle of Granicus in 334 BCE marked the first major confrontation between Alexander and the Persian forces. This battle would set the tone for his future campaigns. At Granicus, the Persian forces, led by satraps, provincial governors, loyal to King Darius III, hoped to push Alexander back. They outnumbered him. But what they lacked was leadership, unity, and the will to fight. Alexander's forces struck with fury, driving the Persians into a rout. The victory was not just a military triumph, it was a symbol. Alexander had crossed the threshold into Asia, and he had begun his quest to bring down the Persian Empire. But it wasn't just the sheer scale of the battles that made Alexander a legend. It was his vision. While he was known for his military might, Alexander was also a man of culture, a man of curiosity. He sought to blend the cultures of East and West, not just conquer them. After his victory at Granicus, Alexander didn't simply claim the lands for his own. He founded cities, Greek cities, everywhere he went, the most famous of which was Alexandria in Egypt. These cities were centers of Greek culture, thought, and power. They were his legacy, not just in military terms, but in intellectual and cultural ones as well. After Alexander's decisive victory at the Battle of Granicus, the Persian Empire had no choice but to retreat. However, their defeat was not final. The true challenge lay ahead, the Persian heartland. But before Alexander could continue his campaign into the depths of Persia, he faced another obstacle. In his path lay Egypt, a key territory in the ancient world known for its immense wealth, culture, and strategic location. Despite the power of the Persian Empire, Egypt had been under Persian rule for years, and many Egyptians resented the Persians. Thus, when Alexander marched into Egypt in 332 BCE, the people did not resist him. Instead, they welcomed him as a liberator. His arrival in Egypt was met with open arms. The Egyptians, exhausted from Persian rule, saw Alexander as a deliverer, a hero who would free them from foreign oppression. In turn, Alexander embraced this role. He did not just conquer Egypt, he became part of its story. One of his most important acts during his time in Egypt was his journey to the Oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis in the Western Desert. The Oracle, one of the most revered in the ancient world, was said to have the power to predict the future and offer divine guidance. When Alexander arrived, he was greeted by the priests who, according to some accounts, declared that he was the son of Amun, the supreme god of Egypt, similar to Zeus in Greek mythology. This declaration was a powerful moment for Alexander. It gave him a sense of divine legitimacy that would guide him throughout his reign. From this point forward, he began to see himself not only as a conqueror, but as a divine ruler, chosen by the gods. Upon his arrival in Egypt, Alexander founded a new city, a city that would become a beacon of culture, commerce, and intellectual pursuit. He named it Alexandria, in his own honor. The city would eventually become one of the most important cities of the ancient world, a hub for scholars, scientists, and artists from all over the Mediterranean. With Egypt under his control and the oracle's endorsement, Alexander turned his attention back to Persia. His campaign was far from over, but the foundations of his empire had already been laid in Egypt, where the blending of Greek and Egyptian culture would have lasting effects for centuries to come. In 333 BCE, Alexander's march continued eastward. His next major confrontation was at the Battle of Issus, one of the most famous and pivotal battles of his campaign. Here, he would face King Darius III of Persia for the first time. Darius, with his vast army, had gathered a force of over 100,000 soldiers, vastly outnumbering Alexander's army, which stood at around 30,000. The odds were clearly against him. But Alexander, as always, was unshaken. The battlefield was located near the narrow plains of Issus, between the mountains and the Mediterranean Sea. The terrain was challenging, but it played into Alexander's hands, limiting Darius's ability to maneuver his larger army. In this battle, Alexander's strategy was nothing short of genius. He used his smaller force to outflank and surround Darius's troops. The battle was fierce, but Alexander's forces struck swiftly and decisively. Darius, realizing that his army was on the brink of collapse, fled the battlefield, leaving behind his wife, mother, and children who were captured by Alexander's men. The victory at Issus was monumental. It not only demonstrated Alexander's military brilliance, but also sent a message to the Persian king. Alexander would stop at nothing to claim victory. After the battle, Alexander showed mercy to the captured royal family. He treated them with respect and even offered them protection, despite their Persian heritage. This move was part of Alexander's broader strategy, to portray himself not only as a conqueror, but as a just ruler who treated both allies and enemies with fairness. The greatest test of Alexander's military genius was yet to come. In 331 BCE, the final showdown between Alexander and Darius III took place at Gaugamela, near modern-day Iraq. Here, the stakes were higher than ever. The Persian Empire's last hope for survival was at risk. The battle would be decisive. The Persian forces, again outnumbering Alexander's army, this time by a margin of nearly 2-1, were prepared for a confrontation that could define the future of the empire. Darius, having learned from his defeat at Issus, arranged his troops in a formidable formation, hoping to trap Alexander and end his campaign once and for all. But Alexander, ever the strategist, had no intention of playing into Darius's hands. He knew that if he could penetrate the heart of the Persian army, its command center, he could break their morale and secure victory. And so, as the battle unfolded, Alexander executed one of the most famous tactical moves in military history. With his cavalry, Alexander launched a direct assault toward Darius's position at the center of the battlefield. Darius's forces, unable to react fast enough, began to unravel. Alexander's relentless pursuit shattered the Persian line, forcing Darius to once again flee the battlefield, this time in panic. With his victory at Gaugamela, Alexander secured the fate of the Persian Empire. The once mighty empire, which had controlled vast stretches of land from India to Egypt, was now at his mercy. After the battle, Alexander entered Babylon, the heart of the Persian Empire, as a conqueror, but also as a liberator. He was hailed as a king by the people, and he quickly began to implement policies that would blend Persian and Greek cultures into one unified empire. With his victory at Gaugamela, the path to the heart of the East was open to Alexander. After defeating the Persian Empire, Alexander turned his attention to the East, where he would face new challenges and conquer new territories. His campaigns in Asia, particularly his ventures into India, were crucial in solidifying his reputation as one of the greatest military strategists in history. In 326 BCE, after his success in Persia and Egypt, Alexander ventured into India. The vast and diverse land held new challenges for him, and his next major test would come at the Battle of the Hydaspes. Here, he would face King Porus, a formidable Indian ruler who had a powerful army and war elephants at his disposal. The battle took place on the banks of the Hydaspes River, a location that would prove pivotal in Alexander's campaign. The Battle of the Hydaspes was one of the most difficult and dangerous battles of Alexander's entire career. King Porus's army was estimated to have around 50,000 soldiers, along with 200 war elephants, which made them an imposing force. In contrast, Alexander's forces numbered around 30,000. Despite the overwhelming odds, Alexander, known for his military genius, managed to devise a brilliant strategy to defeat the Indian king. One of the most significant factors in Alexander's victory was his crossing of the river. At the time, it was believed that the Hydaspes River would be nearly impossible to cross, as the monsoon season had caused the water levels to rise. However, Alexander's army secretly crossed the river at a location far upstream, surprising King Porus and forcing him to fight on unfamiliar ground. This unexpected move caught Porus off guard and gave Alexander the upper hand in the battle. The battle itself was intense, but Alexander's superior tactics and the discipline of his soldiers ultimately led to victory. Although Porus put up a fierce resistance, his army could not withstand the onslaught from Alexander's well-trained forces. Following the battle, Alexander spared King Porus's life and even restored his kingdom, treating him with respect. This move was not only a demonstration of Alexander's strategic brilliance, but also a part of his policy of cultural integration. He wanted to be seen not as a ruthless conqueror, but as a ruler who respected the cultures and leaders of the lands he conquered. The victory at the Hydaspes allowed Alexander to push deeper into India, but it also marked the limit of his eastward expansion. His soldiers, exhausted by years of relentless campaigning, refused to march further. Despite his desire to continue, Alexander was forced to turn back, but his conquest in the east had already reshaped the political and cultural landscape of the region. While his military conquests were impressive, Alexander's ambitions went beyond mere territorial expansion. He had a vision of creating a unified empire that merged Greek and Eastern cultures into a harmonious whole. This vision was exemplified by his policies in the lands he conquered, where he sought to blend Greek and local traditions, cultures, and governance systems. One of the most notable aspects of Alexander's rule was his establishment of Greek-style cities in the lands he conquered, most notably Alexandria in Egypt. These cities became hubs of Greek culture, learning, and commerce, serving as bridges between the Greek and Eastern worlds. Alexander also encouraged the intermarriage between his soldiers and local women, aiming to integrate the various peoples of his empire. He himself married Roxana, a Persian princess, symbolizing the merging of Greek and Persian royal bloodlines. Moreover, Alexander adopted certain Persian customs and administrative practices, hoping to gain the loyalty of his new subjects. He also respected local religions and traditions, allowing the conquered people to maintain their cultural identities while subtly promoting Greek philosophy, art, and governance. In this way, Alexander's empire became a melting pot of cultures, ideologies, and traditions, with Greek culture at its core. However, not all of Alexander's policies were successful in the long run. While many of the Greek cities he founded prospered, some of his attempts to merge Greek and Eastern cultures were met with resistance, especially among his soldiers, who were often uncomfortable with some of the more Persian-like practices Alexander adopted. In the final years of his life, Alexander's health began to deteriorate. He fell seriously ill in 323 BCE while in Babylon, the heart of the Persian Empire, and despite the efforts of his physicians, he died at the young age of 32. His death shocked the world, as he had achieved what few could have ever imagined. He had created one of the largest empires in history, stretching from Greece to India. Alexander's sudden death led to uncertainty and infighting among his generals, known as the Diadochi. These former companions of Alexander fought for control of different parts of the empire, eventually splitting it into several Hellenistic kingdoms. Though Alexander's empire did not survive in its original form, his legacy lived on through the Hellenistic culture, which blended Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Indian influences, and through the cities and institutions he founded across the ancient world. Even though Alexander's empire fragmented shortly after his death, his influence was profound and enduring. His campaigns sparked the spread of Greek culture, philosophy, and science, leading to the era known as the Hellenistic Age. The cities he founded, like Alexandria, became centers of learning, philosophy, and trade, influencing generations to come. Moreover, Alexander's conquests helped to establish trade routes that connected the East and West, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. In many ways, Alexander the Great was a bridge between different worlds, blending cultures, religions, and philosophies to create a more interconnected world. His legacy, though his empire did not last, helped shape the course of history for centuries, impacting the Roman Empire and the rise of Christianity, and even inspiring later figures like Napoleon Bonaparte. Upon the sudden death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE, his vast empire, which stretched from Greece to India, was left without a clear successor. Alexander had no heirs at the time of his death. His only legitimate heir was a young child, Alexander IV, born to his wife Roxana, who was still an infant. This left the empire in a state of uncertainty, and without a strong figurehead to unite the empire, internal divisions began to emerge. The most notable of these divisions were the Diadochi, Alexander's generals and trusted companions who began vying for power. These generals, known as the Diadochi, which means successors, divided the empire into several territories, each governed by a different general. Prominent among them were Ptolemy, who took control of Egypt, Seleucus, who took over much of the Persian Empire, and Antigonus, who ruled parts of Asia Minor and Syria. These territories would later evolve into powerful Hellenistic kingdoms, but the unity Alexander had forged was broken. Although Alexander had hoped his empire would remain unified, the lack of a central leadership led to fragmentation. The Hellenistic period that followed was marked by the rise of new kingdoms that carried the influence of Greek culture across the world. Yet none of these kingdoms could ever recreate the vast unity that Alexander had achieved through his conquests. Despite the division, Alexander's vision of spreading Greek culture lived on through these kingdoms, especially in places like Alexandria in Egypt, which became a hub of Greek learning and philosophy. Even though Alexander's empire was fragmented, the Hellenistic kingdoms that emerged in the aftermath of his death continued to thrive. The Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, led by Ptolemy I, became one of the most prosperous of these successor states. The Ptolemies not only embraced Greek culture, but also fused it with Egyptian traditions, creating a unique blend of art, architecture, and governance. Alexandria, the capital of the Ptolemaic kingdom, became one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, known for its library, which was one of the largest and most important in antiquity. In the east, Seleucus founded the Seleucid Empire, which stretched across the former Persian Empire. The Seleucid Empire played a crucial role in the spread of Greek culture into regions like Persia, India, and Mesopotamia. However, the Seleucid Empire faced constant challenges from both internal and external forces, including the rise of the Parthian Empire and various revolts within the empire's territories. Despite these challenges, the Seleucid Empire remained an important player in the Hellenistic world for several centuries. While the political unity of Alexander's empire did not survive his death, his cultural legacy continued to shape the world for centuries. The Hellenistic period saw the fusion of Greek culture with local traditions in the conquered territories, leading to the development of a new cultural synthesis. Greek language and ideas spread far beyond Greece itself, influencing art, architecture, philosophy, and science. In art, the Hellenistic period is known for its realism and emotional expression. Greek artists developed new techniques that portrayed the human form in more naturalistic and dynamic ways. Statues like the Laocoon group and the Venus de Milo exemplify this shift toward more lifelike, emotionally charged representations. In science and philosophy, the Hellenistic world saw the rise of some of the most significant thinkers in history. Philosophers like Epicurus, Zeno of Citium, founder of Stoicism, and Pyrrho contributed to the development of new schools of thought. The Library of Alexandria became a beacon of knowledge, attracting scholars from across the world. Figures like Euclid, the father of geometry, and Archimedes, known for his discoveries in physics and engineering, helped lay the foundation for scientific knowledge that would influence Western thought for millennia. Alexander the Great's life and conquests remain a testament to human ambition, vision, and military genius. His ability to lead men through daunting challenges and his unwavering commitment to his vision of a unified empire are hallmarks of his extraordinary character. Though his empire did not survive him, his influence endured through the Hellenistic kingdoms, the spread of Greek culture, and the legacy he left in the realms of art, science, and philosophy. Alexander's legacy is not just one of military conquest, but also of cultural exchange and the idea of a unified world. His conquests reshaped the ancient world and helped create a lasting cultural synthesis that has influenced civilizations throughout history. Even today, over 2,000 years later, Alexander's name is synonymous with greatness, and his story continues to captivate the imagination of people around the globe.